Okay. I could zoom here. All right, welcome folks. Here we are. Week 2, session 2, urban innovation, cultural placemaking. I had a faculty meeting today and we talked about people having trouble with Zoom. We're having no trouble compared to many of the faculty in sociology are having people losing their connections. There's all kinds of things. So congratulations to all of us, especially Alan, for masterminding everything. We agreed to have 1 or 2 things in the way of announcements. Brandon, are you there now?
Yeah, I'm here.
Would you want to lead off with the points about that you were going to feature Dropbox and 1 other, I think?
About like the discussion board and stuff?
Yeah, sorry, I said, that's what I meant. I mistakenly spoke when I said Dropbox.
No, that's okay. I guess what some of you have been asking about the discussion board, and I don't know if you have like a specific question now, like you can ask me, but it's basically like, I think that it's like, correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, but it's like, my sense is that it's like, you know, it's like, we want you to participate, you're like supposed to participate. It's like, we recognize that, you know, some people are now taking 2 classes at the same time or in different time zones. So it's like, if you can, you know, find a way to like participate in the course, whatever that means to you, or like, well, not what it means to you, but there's a couple different options. One is, you know, like coming to office hours. One is, you know, asking questions during lecture. One is going to the discussion boards. I will say about the discussion board, though, that I feel like it's not just another participation outlet, or it's not only that, but is also an opportunity for like you all to find like other people who are interested in the stuff you're interested in. So for example, there's been like a cluster of interest around kind of like this development, Theaster Gates, like a lot of people were talking about his like 9 like theses or whatever on the board. So it's like, if things like that start emerging, it's like that can help connect you to other people. And we can also, you know, have smaller groups away from the main class of people who share similar interests. So I encourage, like, even if you know, are coming to office hours and are asking questions during class, I would still encourage you to check out the discussion board and see what people are talking about. And if you have something to say to them, I have been in the discussion boards. Sometimes I'll respond to people if I feel like I have something to say or something, usually something to point you to. That is not like a good or a bad thing. I mean, it's always good in the sense that you're saying something that's provoking something in my brain. So that's a good thing. But it's not like I'm telling you you're wrong or something. I'm just trying to like complicate and give you some more stuff to talk about. So I encourage you to, like, you know, reach out to me if you have questions about anything that I said there. And yes, and then there was just some questions people were having difficulties with some of the course readings. I sent an email about that. People were having problems locating some of them. And I know that a lot of shippers have like long delays right now. So some publishers have started making stuff more available, or maybe it was always available and I'm just realizing it. But a couple of the books, like Steamscapes, for example, you can access the full text through like the library interface, even if you're not on campus. The Fleury, I haven't really been able to find a virtual version.
I'll speak to Fleury, or let me just jump in right here. On the revised syllabus, I mean, I spent an hour on the Fleury book because it's harder to access, but it's available for free via Google and Amazon with the links pasted on version 10 and 11. Today, I just pasted 11. Both 10 and 11 have the links to free access for maybe a third of the book, for the first third or so of the book. So you get the key general points on, I think, Google, and then on Amazon it's called Choose Surprise Me, and it jumps you through the book, and you get maybe a third or so of the book from one and from the other. So together, if you've got almost 60%, I don't know if it's exactly 60%, but you get a pretty good exposure if you don't find anything else. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Brandon.
That was kind of done, unless there's something else you want me to talk about.
Okay, no, those were the main things. And we did have several other more general emails from people asking, how can I discuss or participate? And we mentioned office hours. The general idea is we want, if we learn a little bit more about your individual interests and how those can be connected more actively with something in the course or some other, and then if we hear some shared interest with other people, like China, like Theaster Gates, like mobilizing the disadvantaged, like trying to find art activists, and how these things are changing, or whatever, then that's a way of potentially not this, many of you or most of you are going to just take the 2 exams, and that's fine. But there's still, many courses will have a short, brief way of participating. One little example would be to make a video of things that you're almost doing anyways. For instance, one of you is in Saudi Arabia, and I suggested, how about looking at the things we're talking about in the course and making a little video, some of them as you go through your daily life in Saudi Arabia, and see how is it different from China or from the West, etc. So that wouldn't take much time if you think of it in those terms, and then comment on. You can comment while you're making. I do that myself. I bike all around Chicago. I carry a cell phone. I stop and I sort of talk while I'm making a video. I say, "Wow, here's something I never saw before. Look at what happened here." Okay, so you can comment on it. And as the student, observer, analyst, social scientist, agent provocateur, and tell us on the video what's going on and why this is meaningful and interesting. Okay, so just I'm throwing that out as an example of a creative way of doing something that you know about that we don't, that will illuminate and interest others, and show your creative thinking about how the ideas in the course can be extended, revised, transformed in ways that fit something you know about. And that's the big theme of the course. How do things change when we go to somewhere else? How does the meaning of individualism change if you go to a traditionally Confucian society in Asia? Etc. BBC, NPR do interviews with people on things like this, and one we will see bits of, which is on the syllabus, which we'll go over today briefly, is about potato, and that's you could think about something like that in Saudi Arabia or in North Texas. How are people handling responses to coronavirus in Texas, and how is their Texas background or their Austin background different from Dallas, and how is Dallas different from Fort Worth, and why, in terms of something like this? Because they're strong, visible. People there will say Dallas is the last city of the East. Fort Worth is the sister city, it's 20, 30 miles away, is the first city in the West. So they're sharply fighting each other in terms of cultural legitimacy of what's right and wrong. Cowboys are right in one, they're bad in the other, etc.
Yeah, and then I would just point out, I also sent an email that has like a bunch of links to, and there's now a discussion board area of a bunch of data and stuff that's being gathered about the pandemic. So, you know, if anyone is interested in like using some of that in conversation with, you know, some of these topics, you know, come talk to us. That would be super interesting, I think.
Absolutely. Any other organizational questions or announcements that anyone would want to raise right now?
There's a question from So Yoon Lee in the Zoom
Okay.
group chat. So the question is, for people who choose to write a paper instead of the midterm or final, should we stick to what is written in the syllabus, submitting abstracts of our paper topics by week 4?
I don't quite understand the part which is should we stick with? Is that in contrast to what? I guess I don't.
Just a very, the specific question is submitting abstract of the paper topics by week 4. Is that?
So is the question, is this the correct deadline?
I guess so. Just sticking with what the syllabus says.
Okay. Yes is the quick answer, but we are flexible and are glad to start talking anytime and to continue talking as we revise. So I would say get in. Okay, so is a message. Sorry, my mic is not working. Yes. Okay. Fine. I'd say meet the deadline with something, and then expect us but we want to participate and talk with you, and starting it a little earlier and doing more of that is better than later. That's the general point.
Okay.
Don't feel the abstract has to be final by any means. Or you can simply say, I can't decide between 2 topics, and here's my brief overview of the 2, and here are my reasons. Try then to add why might 2 be better than 1 if you have distinctive interest or knowledge about one versus the other. Then and you know, put that in a short email. Then let's talk, email or Skype or Zoom or whatever. And those are good general points for everyone. And this, I'm following up on Brandon's comment that just having some communication is helpful, especially as they're big things that we don't know about you and you don't know about us until we talk a little bit. And we did that. Well, no, okay, we've done that with a couple of students on Monday, and that was helpful for me to see some specific interests. Anything else like that? Okay, the main carryover from last time was that we didn't get to Fleury and the Beaubourg Center. Let me introduce it briefly with the following. Here's a fat book, as you can see, Bourdieu's Distinction, and Bourdieu has made a big impact with this in France and in the U.S. Very negative, very positive, very mixed, and I was in Paris for a doctoral dissertation defense. I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and I said, anybody new doing anything new on anything doing cultural work which may link with critique Bourdieu or do things differently? And someone said, you really ought to talk to Laurent Fleury. And so actually, I mean, this comes later. So I did. I met with him, and he and then got a couple of his. I got 3 of his books. This is the main one on Beaubourg. There's another one which is on the TNP, the Théâtre National Populaire. This is the 3rd book, which is an overview of sociology of culture textbook. The 3 books, then I said, wow, these are amazing. Lots of new things, very creative. So I said, why don't we do an English translation summarizing the 3 books? And here it is. As I read these through, I said, you know, this is really a dramatic elaboration to, you know, complementary perspective on the same kinds of themes that we've had from Bourdieu and related discussions. And then we were in Montreal for a session, a big conference there, and I interviewed him, and we've tried to get subtitles, but we haven't been able to do it. But why don't, just so you can see his face, I want to let you see his face, just see him talk for 1 minute, and then I'll comment, so you get a flavor of.
It's all in French. Should we start from the beginning?
Yeah, go ahead. Just play it in French for
L'idée de
45
poursuivre
seconds.
ces deux grands livres tellement impressionnants sur le TNP de Villard et sur Beaubourg. Voilà. J'avais le sentiment qu'il y avait peut-être un point qui était partagé par les deux institutions, qui était la question de comment instaurer un rapport au public et comment instaurer un rapport au plus haut de la création. Et j'avais le sentiment de...
Autre que la création.
En fait, de la création théâtrale ou de la création musicale avec Pierre Boulez, ou bien la très grande bibliothèque publique avec... Comme j'entendais les politiques se saisir.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, I asked him, you know, how'd you come to write these 2 books that are so interesting? And he basically elaborates and says he's been thinking about and working on the same things as Bourdieu for much of his career. And when he read the stuff of Bourdieu, he was very frank in the interview, which is why I wanted to show it briefly, more so than he is in writing, of saying he was just shocked and horrified at the degree to which Bourdieu was really one, he omitted the 2 most important institutions in Paris at the time that Bourdieu himself was working. And Bourdieu worked as a research assistant when they were doing some early evaluation studies of the Beaubourg Center. So then the results which came out in those early reviews, as well as most of the publications of Bourdieu, were a very strong attack on the Ministry of Culture. And I mentioned briefly last time that the ministry was created under de Gaulle. Its goal was to both enhance and encourage creativity, but also to enhance the patrimonial tradition of French culture, but then to bring this to all citizens, rich and poor, rural and urban, and there's a huge split between Paris and non-Parisians, etc. And so Bourdieu basically, for 10 years or more, simply wrote again and again, the Ministry of Culture has failed. It is only serving the elite. It is not responding to the average and lower status persons. Okay, so Fleury looked at a little bit and then got interested enough to do these 2 books. This is one, I couldn't find the one on the TNP last night, but basically he's done big, thorough, 5, 6, 7 years of research on each of these. They're connected because the TNP was first. It was a suburban theater, suburban so-called red belt, communist town, communist director, and it developed its whole approach. And then that was adapted by the Beaubourg Center in the middle of downtown Paris. And they've both been, and here's the big point. The theater became the most popular, successful, not only in numbers, not only in reaching the disadvantaged, but in doing the most emotionally interpretive, creatively interpretive, high quality performances of any theater in Paris by far. And I was a student in France at the time. I went to a 2-week summer session in Avignon where we had the director, we had actors, we had staff talking about how it worked, how it was so successful. And it was, I mean, as a 20-year-old student, I was fascinated. I went to everything I could, and then it led me to discover Bertolt Brecht, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing basically with the Beaubourg Center. As I mentioned, it has more people visiting than the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower combined. So if we had, and it includes art museums, galleries, and we'll have a little bit of this in the background. Sure, we can start anytime, Jim, and if you want to just start playing them in the background. This is the crowd around both the crowd around the Beaubourg Center, and the name of it has two names: Pompidou Center and Beaubourg is the area. So it's got this shocking exterior architecture, which sends the message of what it's trying to do. It wants to shock and contrast with everything else of 19th century traditional Paris. So we'll let this play in the background. And what these people say in Chinese and French and English is, I love the Beaubourg Center. I love Beaubourg. And so all kinds of different people are saying it. Looks pretty spontaneous, but who knows? But the point is, the numbers keep showing up, and you can see and feel, and this is what's in his book. That is that people say things like that. They're people who live nearby who become members and who go maybe twice a month for different kinds of seminars, lectures, movies, special dinners, and they get to know people in a smaller group, in the same manner that with the TNP before in the suburb, the Communist Party cell members knew each other reasonably well, but they went to the theater together, and they then would talk afterward about that experience. So you have the creation of a personal set of relations with people that people get to know better, and in that way enhance the messages from the film or the art show, combined with the personal discussions of what they're doing. Okay, so that's one part of it. Second big part is the content. The content of what is what they're doing, what you're seeing here, is different from anything else in Paris. It's not simply a dogmatic Marxist whatever presentation. It's not Hollywood. It's not the Louvre. It has a style which is sort of challenging, unusual, shocking in some ways, but also big. And so they had, for instance, in some of these pictures, I think they have 2,000 sites where you can go and just work with your computer for free. They have good internet connections. They have books you can download either electronically as well as big open stacks. Open stacks are almost unknown in France. And when I did my PhD and I was going all around, I had a terrible time getting access. So it's got lots of public citizen responsive access in general, and in interesting content. So okay. Second, surrounding the outside of the building, you've got a whole neighborhood, and that's why the neighborhood is called Beaubourg. It was the former area of wholesale markets for food, and it had sort of rundown buildings that were about to be torn down completely anyway, so the space became available, but it then has been built up. I wouldn't call it gentrification at all. That is, it's transformed so it's been used by other people. But you've got cafes, bookshops, but it is not a high end. It's not a high end neighborhood of Paris. It's a middle, mixed income, mixed social background kind of area. But they've got look at all the cafes in the background there. The whole thing is surrounded by snack food, cafes, bookstores, leisure shopping, and there's a crowd all the time, almost, if not all 24 hours, at least most days, most nights, weekdays and weekends. Parisians, French from all over France, international visitors, etc. And the whole place is designed to permit this kind of stuff. I mean, you're allowed to put your feet in the fountain, which you can't do in most fountains in France, etc. Okay, so if that's a quick overview of how it's different. What Bourdieu then, sorry, what Fleury then does is, after summarizing the content of these of how and why these two institutions, the theater and the Beaubourg Center, really work and attract. That is, let me just reinforce one more time. Also, high quality art, and you'll see that a little bit with the style and the sub-styles with the guy who's going to show us around. But secondly, clearly, okay, here he is. Here's we got, this is great because he speaks in French, but he's got subtitles, so you can see what he's saying as he walks around, and you get a flavor of the non-traditional style of the whole place and of the paintings as he walks around. Okay, those are the main points of the the theater and the Beaubourg Center. The next question is, how does this relate to what we've read in this section on Monday, to Adorno, to the others, Bourdieu and Ritzer, who have a strong, that is what Fleury characterizes them as, is basically using non-aesthetic, non-artistic criteria and perspectives, such as wanting to show off. And the classic example is Thorstein Veblen's concept of conspicuous consumption, that you want to show off that you're better than other people, that you're higher in status, that you're richer in income, and you show your money by buying a big castle or constructing it. And the French example was Louis XIV in Versailles, where that was pretty explicitly done. And I quoted him already, is the superfluous is a very necessary thing. Okay, Bourdieu basically uses that as his main core idea. It can be qualified in the sense that there are different repertoires, there are different frames, context, fields is one term he uses, and they have different rules of the game. But basically the continuing theme is the high versus the low. Yeah, okay, you see this, the bat, which is literally sucking his partner George Dyer into the abyss toward oblivion. I mean, that's not the normal topic of a painting in the Louvre. Okay. So theme, what's the interpretation, and what's the how to do a book which pulls this together coherently. What he has done in the short textbook in French and then in the English adaptation is to pull the three pieces together: the TNP, Beaubourg, and the overview. What's the overview? It's an overview of the whole sociology of culture field, such as we're covering here in part, with Marx, with Simmel, with Adorno, with Bourdieu, with Habermas, and in that sense covering many of the same readings we do here. But in each case, he gives you a very different perspective on these from what you get with Bourdieu, or let's say one American, and I'd say, let me try to frame it carefully. A smart American working on related issues is Paul DiMaggio at Princeton. He did DiMaggio has done many kinds of things, but some of his work, and let me make the main point with some linking DiMaggio with the studies which he published on the data from the surveys by the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. And the NEA surveys look at citizens across the US. They interview them every 2 years or so and ask them, what kinds of artistic activities do you participate in? Yeah, okay, correction. He's now an emeritus at NYU. Good point. His basic finding is if you correlate, if you correlate the social backgrounds, income, education, occupation, race of the U.S. national population with the benchmark items. What are benchmark items? Opera, museums, concerts, traditional, what it used to be called high art, not popular culture in the sense of Michael Jackson. And so if you correlate those two, you find that upper status persons tend to more often go to than lower status persons. And that the total number of persons going to these performances is in decline over time. That's basically the Bourdieu kind of finding as well in distinction. And what Fleury then does is to say, let's look at this by individual institution, and his main answer as to how things which can be really potentially dramatically changed is what Fleury calls the institution or the institutional rules. And things like, or rules is too strong, but the examples of the communist cell or the monitors of Beaubourg, the people who can become, I think you would become a member, you'd pay a little fee to come to the monitor sessions and to get into the exhibits, where you could have a guy like this lead you around and look at the paintings and then ask questions and so forth. Fleury's big answer then is look more closely at how the specifics of the organization, the art institution, work, and that they may be done in a way, as in the case of these two most important institutions in France, that they refute the results of the National Endowment for the Arts survey, and they refute Bourdieu's studies, which were analogous to it in various ways, either by institution or he had national or Parisian or other big survey studies. Then, as I mentioned, he joins this with, or he looks for ways of joining these new findings with other work by many other people, the main people participating in the sociology of culture field, in especially Germany, France, US, England, some degree, but those are the countries which have done most of the theorizing, the work, empirically active kinds of folks. And as you heard from Qi, there's now a lot of interest in looking at these as open questions. As you have a strong Communist Party background, you have heavily government-funded institutions. The Chinese are actively investing in the arts in ways that these are internationally important, and join with the rise of the domestic consumption economy and cultural orientation within China. So with those as the big points, and now that you're getting a flavor both inside and outside, the content, you get just seeing the pictures of the stuff around, you get a flavor of how different Beaubourg is from a traditional art museum and the same is true when they have other activities. Questions, comments on this for a bit? And how many of you have ever been to Boborg? Anybody want to raise a hand? Okay, Brandon has. Anybody else? Any students? Not a single student? Nobody's jumping up. Brandon, you want to comment on Boborg?
I mean, this.
Raising hand.
Oh, someone's raising a hand.
Yeah. Okay. So Santiago, he's our one French student representative. Okay. So yeah. You want him first, or you want to comment, Brandon?
Let him talk. I haven't been there since like 2010.
Okay. Santiago, tell us your reactions to Boborg.
Yeah, I just haven't been there like for a long time, like Brandon. But the last times I've been there, it was like in 6 years ago, and well, the last years I went there in the neighborhood, especially because there's lots of activities, as you said. So I just wanted to relate it to the fact that you said there were big spaces where people would meet up around Boborg, surrounding Boborg. And yeah, that's mainly what I can relate to, because like there's lots of artists and street artists performing. And there's also like the Marais, which is like just next to Boborg, which is like a very lively neighborhood. And lots of artists perform there, but mainly like street artists. And that's what's interesting about the place. Like there's lots of dancing around Boborg. Then like for what's in Boborg, I haven't been there for a lot of time, so I wouldn't be able to tell you my experience. But around Boborg, it's very, very interesting and very lively.
Okay. Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, like looking at art, like I guess like Bacon or something, I feel like, yeah, maybe that doesn't look like a traditional painting, but that's just kind of like what a lot of contemporary painting looks like. But it's like the thing that I think is unique about Boborg is that it's like you oftentimes have things like the Art Institute, where it's like they have some spaces that are kind of like more performance type oriented, or where you can screen a film. But it's like the thing that's I think unique about the Pompidou is how it's like it has like all of those things, like performance, film, music, like art, and it seems to not really one feels like it's privileged over the other. Whereas like in the US, it's like, you know, there will be like it's like the places that are, you know, really showing theater and the places that are really doing art, it's like those are separate places. So it's like the way that it, to me, one of the things I remember about it is the way that it kind of like brought all of that stuff under kind of like one roof and not seeming to privilege one over the other, which is something that I hadn't really seen in the US.
Yeah, that's an important point that I maybe didn't bring out, and let me do so by again a Chicago U.S. or comparison everywhere in the world. Daniel Barenboim was a top conductor, pianist, music activist in Paris and in Chicago. You think he was music director in Chicago for maybe 8 years, 10 years. In those years, they were getting Boborg started. And basically, they created a huge kind of, I've forgotten the name of it, laboratory or institute, something of that sort, where they had composers writing music and talking about their problems of writing new music and then trying things out and then performing in small groups with a little orchestra and then having larger performances. So and they tried to do the same thing in Chicago. So you have a little bit, they added a restaurant at the back of the Chicago Symphony. They added a big shop where you can buy gifts, books, pictures, posters, and things like that. So that was a step in that direction. Then they had they added a more active series of visitors from other places. but they don't really have the serious, engaged support of composers writing new music, or as you pointed to, painters doing new paintings, or sculptors doing new sculpture, the way Theaster Gates is talking about it. So in that sense, there's a recognition and an explicit government. Both these, the TNP and Bobourg, are, I mean, at 80-90% national government funded institutions, sort of big institutions, big money, and dramatically iconic, or architecture, which is iconic in that ways that we talked about it right at the beginning, showing Versailles. So the Chicago Bobourg comparison is great, and it shows the great strength, but also the huge amount of funding which went into this right at the beginning. That is, I will add, the funding has gone up and down, as has the political orientations, because I've interviewed people at the Ministry of Culture, and I say, what's the perspective of people here in the ministry on such and such? And I was said, well, this week it's this, but we don't know what it's going to be next week. The government hasn't taken a position yet. So that is, they're very much on top decisions influenced by national elections and the national government. So it changed from, the Mitterrand socialists, and Mitterrand, when he first came to power for 2 years, had a coalition with the Communist Party. That led to massive losses in local elections after about 2 years. And the socialists then transformed their whole program, even though they still called it the same Socialist Party. And then in turn, we have now Macron. And so you've got big changes with different styles of leadership. And that is partially reflected, or that is reflected in the Fleury book. But he points out that these were always mediated by many staff, many people in between. So you didn't have a direct imposition of a political program. It was much, it wasn't the way President Trump would like it to be, if you will. That is, the French bureaucracy is pretty tough at defending itself, and so of preserving high quality art. Nevertheless, there were changes in how the monitors were funded and how actively it might connect with other groups, such as a communist party in the case of the TNP. So the counterpart, you could say, was that when Clinton, if I got this right, yeah, I think when Clinton was first elected, after 2 years or so, he had a majority against him, and the leader of the majority in the U.S. Congress, it was the opposite of Trump right now. We had a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, and they were led by a infamous high school historian who hated what the NEA and the NEH were doing, and basically proposed abolishing them altogether, not letting them write any more history books, and so forth, because they were treading on our conception of what good Americans should be. And in that way, that is, I'm making the point that American political interference with arts institutions is probably, in many respects, stronger than it is within France, in part because some of these big national institutions, or let's say the local institutions, are more protected by localism, in the sense that in the US, if you disagree with what goes on in a school, you can have someone on the local school board who can really change that decision fast and locally. Whereas in France, you got to change the whole national Ministry of Education's policies if one book seems not to fit with what people in one town want. So basically, you do not get local responsiveness in the French system on many things, whether it's about how the police work, or bribing a policeman, or having a book in a library, or what is taught in a history course. So these are cultural differences. That's a major cultural difference around the world. And the quick point I'll make is the US is very unusual in global perspective. Most of the world is closer to something like France or China or Japan, where you have a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of Culture, and more standard national policies, although France and China are probably the most extreme cases today. They do the same thing, they just do it more thoroughly and better than in say in Nigeria. Okay, so, but the degree of decentralization or citizen engagement is a major change going on throughout culture and political activation, citizen mobilization, civic groups that I cover in many of my courses, and we've documented in many ways in books and surveys for the last 20 to 30 years. But it's new in this course. That is, in this course, what we're doing is taking it a step further to talk not just about what you read, but what you do to potentially transform an individual neighborhood where people may do it yourself. And we'll have that in a later section, DIY. You know, you don't need to wait for the ministry, you don't need to wait for Beaubourg to do it. You can just go out and, you know, some people are now doing this, you know, repaint your house in a different color with, okay. So any other comment on Bourdieu or any of this that you want to drop in, Brandon, or want to keep going? Okay, let's cover some of the more readings and then discuss a little more generally. The next section has scenescapes, the land chapter. The big point here is the background point is that in Adam Smith, there were three classes that competed with each other. The capitalists, owners of factories, the farmers and landowners, second, and third, the workers. And so in Malthus's work in the early 19th century by economists, these were seen as the three classes and the three economic divisions over which there was conflict. When it got to Marx, he said there are two classes, and this looked as if it was just something that came with as soon as Marx started writing. But in 1938 or 30, I think it was 38, 37, people discovered in Moscow in the writings of the young Marx a whole new book or set of things they published as a book, Foreign Language Publishing House in Moscow published it, and it made a huge impact because it showed that the young Marx was closer to Hegel, and he was talking about three classes. And Marx then said, you know, these landowners, they've got people like poets, musicians, people who were glorifying the flowers of rural England, people who were making nature and nature walks and forests and trees attractive, people who were saying that the manor house where the patron, or let's say the local owner, is helping the disadvantaged. This is undermining class consciousness. And from a Hegelian standpoint, Hegel basically said, you know, the history of the world is basically driven by a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis later on. And you can't have a thesis and an antithesis if there are three. You can only have two. So basically, Marx almost says that explicitly, and then says, you know, he didn't use the term there, that came in his work later, but basically we get false consciousness. We get a lot of false consciousness of people talk about the beauties of the countryside. But then he then would try to say, most of those landowners really, especially in England, they're dirty capitalists, and let's lump them together with the owners. And that's what has happened for much of the social sciences, including sociology especially. There has been minimal focus on the idea of territory and local areas. The big exception is Chicago sociology, where we talk about neighborhoods and they're called community areas, using that sort of more personable title of community. Vaguely can mean ethnic group, it can mean youth group, it can mean gays, it can mean people in Bronzeville in various interpretations. But But Chicago is very exceptional within the US. And the, the main point was that through much of the 19th and into the 20th century, many economists followed Marx and not, let's say, some economists. Two important exceptions in economics and sociology were Alfred Marshall at the end of the 19th century, and then Talcott Parsons and Neil Smelser, who did a book on economics. And they basically said, we should take more seriously the idea which was discussed especially by Smith a little bit, but then especially Malthus, that land in the specific literal sense can be fertile, better land for growing something, or better for livestock to graze on if it has the right things for Genghis Khan to cross across the plains, or for different kinds of activities, the specifics of land, such as water, having enough rainfall, etc. These are critical components transforming the value of the resources, which you may have if you bring in seeds, if you bring in tractors, if you bring in staff, workers. How much they will produce depends on the quality and the way you combine these with the basics of the meaning of, and so the meaning of land can be not necessarily just the physical ground, but can also be what's in the minds of the people. That is, if you have farmers who you're working with as a team, and you work together and you respect each other and you really want to grow the crop, then you can do more and better. And we'll have a video in a second on China, how they've done this. But the general point is the land can be linked with the general metaphor of local culture, and that culture and the geographically specific culture, or the ethnically specific culture, which then ethnic using that US word, goes back to usually a foreign location outside the country where people were more geographically close. So in that sense, land is a powerful linkage to culture in ways that we are elaborate and through the term scene. And so scene is not just a neighborhood, it's not just a community, as those terms have been used in the 20th century in Chicago sociology in the past. We add more the openness, but also the local specificity in ways that are elaborated in this chapter, and then show with some specifics the just flipping here myself. A couple of examples how if I choose just one thing, I can, if it's handy for you, you can look at page 25 of the Scenescapes book. Yeah, if that's easy for you, Alan, to put up. Sorry, I didn't mention this in advance, but I'll keep talking, and if it's easy to bring that, yeah, and you're super fast. This basically shows boxes and arrows, which I try to use when we can to clarify and simplify these. Yeah, page 25. Boxes and arrows show three things: technology, and the specific, there it is, technology industry clusters. These are things like Silicon Valley, or in earlier years, Route 128 around Boston, where you had, in the earlier years, you had competition between Boston and San Francisco as high-tech centers. Boston had a hierarchical style that if you worked for the biggest company there, DEC, D-E-C, you could not talk to any other computer company. You had to go home. You couldn't meet with, share any of that information, or socialize personally with people working for a competing firm. And that was the general Boston style. In Silicon Valley, they took the opposite view. They said, fine, and there were many people, there were lots of little firms there, and many of them were using an approach called open source. That is, they shared their program language, they shared their ideas, they shared the information. They did not try to keep everything private and separate. And so the idea is if we look not just at Boston and San Francisco, but we look at every county in the US, 3,000 counties, they vary in the degree to which they have technology clusters. They have, I mean, some are big, some are small, etc. But and the normal finding is the path at the bottom. That if you have more tech, you get more local economic development, income, jobs, human capital. These tend to grow more if you've got high tech. And this is in the newspaper all the time, where these big tech firms are dominating our lives and so forth. But everyone is taking for granted in terms of the stock market growth and lots more that they're creating lots of new products, new jobs, including if you include there even Amazon, although that it's marginal. But let's say obviously Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. All right, so what I'm talking around and getting to is the box at the top. It's the scene. And this is like the land in Malthus and in Adam Smith. You can have productive land in the sense of the Silicon Valley if you have cafes, restaurants, or if we had a Boborg Center, or we had artistic activities which engage people either within Silicon Valley where the leading headquarters are, and they do a little bit of this, but more so within the areas nearby, and especially in the city of San Francisco itself, spilling over into Berkeley and into Oakland and places north and south of San Francisco, that we've got choices where people can easily get together and talk about computers or programming or totally new products. And that if you have more scenes that are scored high, and we had a list of maybe 350 or so BizZip items, and then we had about 120 Yellow Page items. So we measure self-expression as one of our 15 dimensions here. We then have control. We have maybe 15 control variables: income, education, race, crime, and so forth. And these three paths still hold strong. That is, the bottom path is there. That's the main normal effect that people have studied. If we then add the scene, we then have a direct effect, which is the right-hand arrow, which is significant. But we also have what's called an interaction effect, and that's shown as an arrow with a circle around the arrowhead. And that means if you have a combination of both the job, like the Apple factory or the Apple headquarters or Apple branch in the west side of Chicago, as well as a scene which promotes self-expression, cafes, bookstores, streets where you can walk around and talk to people, or WeWork, or the entrepreneurial Polsky Center of the University of Chicago. And Stanford does a lot more of this than most other universities. They really have industrial parks where they try to promote this kind of thing. You can generate a combination where the set of both the technology firm and the scene generates substantially more local economic development. And so that's how land, in that sense, the arts as an expression of what we can find in a local area can transform even what look like techie, narrow, non-cultural, non-artistic kinds of activities. Okay, any comments, questions on those ideas, or anything that you may have read if you had a chance to look at some of the chapter? Especially students, please speak up. Yeah, we thank you, Alan. You're flipping through the pages to remind us of other things that are there. Okay. Okay, let me push on. Next reading is well, I'm going to go briefly over these two. You get three. I'll go over these three fairly briefly, and then we'll get in the Chinese video. Alan Scott is an economic geographer, Marxist background, English at UCLA, and it's a fat book called On Hollywood, and it has one big idea basically. It's called that is he's in that underlined section. Thank you for someone underlining that with a red. He mentions you see there aestheticization. That's not what the book's about. The book is about commodification. The book is really it's really an old, very simple 19th century geography idea that the distance of a small firm that might contract out, like an actor's costume firm, or a firm that would try to help get actors get jobs with different studios, or sound effects, or other. I mean, most of Hollywood is decentralized and all kinds of firms doing very specialized activities. And the question is, which ones succeed more and get paid more and get more contracts? And the answer of the book is, if you're close to the studios, you get more. Alas, that's about the end of the book. So the point is, despite that underlined section, it does not deal with or try to analyze. Yeah, here we go. How do these localized articulations of economic activity, et cetera, and actually what tends to intensify them? And the answer is distance. And it really just deals with distance in a fairly narrow sort of way. Well, related is the idea of the term Fordism is used to update the Marx label of commodification. Okay, but those are ancillary to the simple idea of distance. So I'm going to skip on and say we've got we'll deal with other interpretations of Hollywood, such as you saw already in Adorno, and we've got then more onward. So Elizabeth Currid is very different. She also is in LA now at USC. She did a PhD at Columbia, and Harvey Malich and Richard Flard and I were on her committee. And the book has the great title, The Warhol Economy, and that tells you basically she's looking at where the arts, especially the Warhol kind of style, is potentially building a new economy. And she has great ethnographic work on three kinds of industries in New York. Popular music, clothes design, and popular art, painting and other things. And the three of these really, so fashion designers, etc. How do they, and her big argument is these three areas in industries mutually reinforce one another by meeting at nightclubs and dancing together, talking, eating, drinking, and then looking at new ideas on the dance floor. How does that new dress really look when she's dancing in it? How does that color combination match up with something that was in a painting that I saw? How does the sound of the music enhance the way that the dress moves, etc.? So that the point is, these three industries have a distinct impact on each other because the people are meeting with each other in the same small set of exclusive, very high-end, very expensive, hard to get tickets or get entree to nightclubs in Lower Manhattan. So she went to these for several years. It talks about how you, and she talks not only about the creativity, which is a key beginning, but second, on the diffusion, the sales, the promotion. And when you've got a volatile, style-driven object like clothes or paintings or music, promotion, marketing is critically important. And so how these things worked is something which she then elaborates with considerable originality. So it's a new twist, a new focus, um, nicely updated. Christina Sakamoto has an idea which is, it's been around. It's been a question for a lot of people whenever one says, you know, the arts are having impact. The question is, what's the chicken and what's the egg? That's good. Let's look at the abstract together. In the classic economic view, jobs attract workers to a city. And I'll just move this over so I can see the rest of the text there. And the city grows. And after the people come to the city, then you get restaurants, shops, and entertainment. And so the question is, how about the causality going the other way? That is, can we imagine that you may have an art institute or a Beaubourg Center, which will lead people to want to come and move to Paris or come to Chicago and live in Chicago because we've got 4 months of festivals started by Jane Byrne, Chicago Fest, etc. And will they then stay and become part of the Chicago labor force, using that sort of classic economic term? And the answer is, in terms of the early bits of research that we and others did on this 20 years ago, we see both. Both of these are going on. And so what Christina's been probing in her thesis, still, she's now near the end, is to answer. So if she's maybe, do we have we got a picture in here that we can see from? I'm trying to remember. I think we got some graphics. Do we have a graphic or two we can just look at? Yeah, skip on with those. Skip on with those. Yeah, okay, here. Okay, so this is the just look at the boxes now. Okay, she's got data from the BizZip source. That is, every zip code, the number of arts jobs and the number of non-arts jobs. And then you look at time one over here in this example, 1998, and time two, 1914. And then she's done the same thing for every single year in between. And the question is, how much are arts jobs in the later year driven by arts jobs in an earlier year? So if you're living in San Francisco or Greenwich Village, the fact that the artists were there, they attract more artists. That's not surprising. That's what you'd expect. The same thing with the bottom straight arrow. What's interesting are the diagonals. How strong are each of the diagonals? That is, do non-arts jobs, and if we have then growth of non-arts jobs, people who are, say, in the oil business, people in the steel business, if they make more money, they hire more people, they pay them more, they bring more people to Dallas, they bring more people to Houston. Does that then drive the arts jobs? That's this arrow going upward into the arts box, or do we find that if we're in New York or Hollywood, where we have a lot of arts jobs in 1998, and we have a growth in those arts jobs in 1999, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, are they growing faster so that the arts drive the non-arts jobs? And the answer is, we find both. She finds both. And then she analyzes how and why did the relative magnitudes of the up arrow versus the down arrow shift. And do we have anything, I mean, in this paper, I'm trying to remember how much we have this not nicely presented in a graph. Yes, skip the equations. This is the fancy quantitative version of this. She's got about four papers she's done alone, or I've done a paper with her too. But the simple one is okay. So these are some of the controls, just to control some of the other models. So you get the more statistical analysis of this. Then you can then say how much are there local differences. And this technique called geographically weighted regression says how different is the causal process in Chicago from Houston or from New York City or LA. Scroll on down maybe, please, if we got anything else here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so let's go. Yeah, okay, this is total jobs, arts jobs and total jobs. Okay, so what you see are these blue spots around New York from Boston to Washington, basically, and then look over in California. Just scroll up a little more so we can see California. Okay, Southern California and San Francisco, we got the same thing. So basically, Hollywood, LA, and San Francisco, and then we've got Seattle. We've got a lot of arts jobs driving total jobs. Whereas in the American South and in the smaller towns in the Midwest, it's the opposite. So the reds are showing you the non-arts jobs are really driving the arts jobs, whereas in the blue areas, it's the opposite, that we've got, I mean, as you'd expect, Hollywood is a driver, but when you get away from Hollywood, you get to lots of other smaller towns and other places such as small towns in Maine or in Connecticut, where people may go to New York now and then, but they have more of an aesthetic of being engaged with the arts. And Chicago example, Wicker Park. So Wicker Park has then been detailed in a monograph by Richard Lloyd, and so this is this is Wicker Park, and then she has analysis of the Chicago neighborhoods here, replicating the same pattern within the city of Chicago. So here's even Pilsen for Brandon. Scroll on down a little bit more. Although these are the main points which we want to make with her. Any questions on Scott Currid or Sakamoto that anyone wants to raise? Yeah, this is good for a second. Just show them the arts categories. You get a sense of, there's a lot of arts data that almost no one has analyzed. And so we have a wide as well as a narrow measure of the arts. We have just, I think it's above it, just the names of the arts. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, just right there. Here are the definitions of the wide category and the narrow category. So if you think about, if you're doing an ethnography in Pilsen, if you're walking around, what is arts? If you get over here to drafting services, radio networks, musical publishers, some of these are people who are selling picture frames. Is that art or not? And so it's included in our wide category. It's not included in the narrow category. Skiing facilities, catering. I mean, that's not very close to art, but we do find that these things are intercorrelated statistically, and that there are impacts, or at least there are relationships among these kinds of things in ways that the things on the left can also provide part-time jobs for people who are working as a waiter at the same time that they're painting paintings at home at night and on the weekend. Okay. Any questions on any of that? Why don't we go to potato? We've got we don't want to. I don't want to cut off any discussion. So let's wait just a minute more. See if there's nobody who wants to. Let's not try to do Yasmin. I would say let's have a little bit of the potato.
We have a student raising hand.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. Please, Spencer.
Hey, yeah, hi, got a question for you. I saw in her paper, I don't think she specifically went into this because I think it would kind of be out of the scope, but she talked about, kind of the idea of areas having tolerances, quote unquote, and one of the things that went into that was having, low culture options, middle culture options, high culture options. So you can have this good sort of effect where you can kind of pick which ones you want. And if you see something that you don't like, you aren't even really fazed by it because you can just skip it and go to another one. And I thought that was an interesting sort of, because that seems to me to describe a sort of edge neighborhood that's at a good, middle point, that it has this diversity of options. But at least like in the US context, I feel like there's an assumption that there's this cycle that these areas kind of, by these arts jobs drawing in so much development, they almost kind of like kill the golden goose at a certain point, and it kind of like creates this quote unquote like inevitable cycle of like constantly moving to new edge neighborhoods, almost like arts draw in the own jobs that kill them. And I was wondering if maybe if you had like experience with that, or opinion on whether or not that really is inevitable.
No, Spencer, I'm delighted you brought that in. I mean, this is a widely discussed ideal typical so-called gentrification process, that the artists kill themselves because the price of rent goes up so much. And it certainly holds in some places some of the time, but where and how much, and what is gentrification, what is good, what is bad, if you want to add the evaluation of it from the standpoint of the poorest or the average or the most affluent, this is where Theaster Gates comes in, and his 9 principles of equitable redevelopment are critical here, because he's really stressing how there are different ways of both evaluating and then trying to generate it. But I would say, why don't we leave it as a question to say, we're going to discuss it more as we proceed, but glance back at the Theaster Gates presentation, and then maybe Christina Sakamoto, and I would say, why don't we end with just a few minutes? Well, or let me pause. For anyone else, any other student want to raise an interesting question like that or anything else? If not, we'll have the potato video. Okay, let's have a little potato if we can, Alan.
Sure.
Sustaining a population as big as China's requires an enormous amount of resources and food, more than China's farmland can naturally produce on its own. The Chinese government recently reported that its farming practices are too intensive to be sustainable. The problem is that China's demand for food has been growing more quickly than its supply. Last year, the Chinese government decided on a bold solution:
Potato, 东北人叫它地蛋.
To transform the potato into one of the country's staple foods. But in a country famed for its rice consumption, getting people to love the spud will require a persuasion campaign of epic proportions.
This is Sister Potato, a loyal Communist Party member, spud farmer, and all-round potato proponent. With impeccable branding, she's taken it upon herself to raise the profile of the humble potato.
我肩负着一个责任，要推进马铃薯在中国的发展进程。土豆，碳水化合物、蛋白质，然后呢，具有抗氧化、抗衰老、抗癌症的功效。现在科学家们告诉我，土豆是减肥的，为什么？所以土豆吃了有好多好处啊！土豆卖得好，发展得好，土豆姐姐功不可没。我是土豆，土豆就是我。
It's fair to say that Sister Potato, as she insists on being referred to, is all aboard the government's potato push. In addition to her music and marketing appearances, she's also created a range of self-promoting potato products.
所以这个是一个很好的挣钱的机会吧。
所以我非常爱土豆，但是我也爱钱。2块钱一个，2块钱一个啊！土豆饼了，2块钱一个。土豆泥做的馅儿，土豆粉做的皮儿。3块钱啊？2块钱一个。买了品尝，买了品尝啊！
在这里，你要尝一尝吧。这是土豆面包。
怎么样？
你觉得呢？
我觉得没我做的好。
Sister Potato may have her eyes on the potato bread, but that doesn't mean that the government isn't onto something. The food supply gap in China is driven by its rapidly growing economy. As incomes grow, tastes change. More expensive food, like meat and protein, requires more grain for feeding livestock, and so the demand for staple grains increases. If you add urbanization to that supply gap, the situation gets worse. Rampant development has left 60% of China's groundwater polluted, and over 3 million hectares of farmland too contaminated to grow crops. That's larger than Massachusetts. With a shortage of crops, China will need to increasingly rely on foreign exports from its current key food supplier, the United States. And China's dependence on the US is just not in their game plan. We met with Carlos Rock-Pelnis, an ethnoecologist and potato expert based out of Beijing.
Why is the government putting so much effort behind this potato push?
So potatoes, they are easy to grow. They grow in bad soils. Their water requirements are low. You don't need irrigation necessarily, so it's cheap. It creates kind of farming where you don't have to be on the land as much.
China is in fact already the world's largest producer of potatoes. But because of China's sheer size, this output is still not enough to propel the potato into the realms of a national staple crop.
I mean, surely if anyone can succeed, China can succeed. It's a one-party government. It's got the ability to push policies left, right, and centre.
It's a little bit of the Ministry of Agriculture versus the housewife, and you never know out. You really don't know who's going to come out on top.
How difficult is it to change that mindset and to get Chinese people to embrace the potato?
It seems that it will be fairly difficult. Potatoes as a spud, like an actual, round potato, it's seen as not Chinese, as foreign, and it's seen as something that, poor people would eat. And then products that are based on potato starch are just kind of a little bit creepy.
这是我们叫火星土豆泥，我们是看了电影的这个火星救援之后，他只吃土豆，我就想我说我能不能创意一道菜啊？这样呢我就想模仿火星上的感觉。这道菜呢我们是希望闭起眼睛吃的。
Beijing-based entrepreneur Wang Dafei is jumping on the potato bandwagon.
那我们也希望呢，能够通过餐厅的方式，跟国家一起来，推动这个土豆的主粮化的这样的一个战略实施。
His new potato-themed restaurant opened last year. Its potato punters seem to be enjoying the anomaly, but whether the Chinese can accept the potato as a staple food remains to be seen.
如果你只能吃米饭还是土豆，你最喜欢吃什么？米饭。米饭。是的。为什么？
就是习惯吧。
习惯了。
对，饮食习惯。
你呢？
我也是米饭吧。
米饭，为什么？
因为土豆应该就是配菜。
Undeterred, Dafei has grand plans to change that mindset, one potato at a time.
不光是说国家来推动，而更多的是这个我们这个市场消费者也会慢慢的去接受他只要尝试过的话，他就会觉得这个东西会很好
And in the interim, our favourite sweet potato is ardently ensuring that her stellar spuds remain centre stage.
All right.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Alan. You see the point, and you see the linkage from Marx and Adam Smith right up to the potato, and you saw one of the masks in the crowd as well. So we will discuss all these things as we proceed, but think about, post something on discussion board. Anything else before we?
One thing I want to add is the song by Sister Potato actually has some sort of interesting authenticity in it. There are two elements I can tease out of this Potato Sister song. One is the communist rap songs popular in Cultural Revolution period. It's a very typical cultural element at the time, and it reminisces many audience that period, although young people may not have this resonance. Another one is quite traditional. It's the Shanxi Plateau, yellow earth sort of style. It's quite traditional, and there are lots of rendition of this sort of style. So I think Sister Potato really merge these two elements together in a way that appeals some sort of authenticity, but this authenticity may seem specious to some people, particularly on the cultural revolutionary memory. But this is something I tease out from this Sister Potato song.
That's an excellent addition. Thank you. Thank you, Alan. I hadn't caught that myself for obvious reasons. Okay.
Sure.
Any closing word from anyone of announcements that we can have office hours again for a little bit now, if anyone wants to talk to us, as well as the hours on the syllabus. Thank you, folks.